Dive into the pulse of Bills football with Turf to Tape, where veteran sideline reporters Sal Capaccio and film room guru Eric Turner deliver a one-of-a-kind podcast experience, combining Sal's unparalleled access to players and coaches with Eric's razor-sharp film breakdowns. The show bridges the gap between casual fans and hardcore enthusiasts. This is Turf to Tape.
This is Turf to Tape, presented by Thin Man Brewery. I'm your host, Eric Turner, joined as always by Sal Capaccio. And Sal, emergency podcast as much as what we don't want to call this one, but we have to, given the news. So let everyone know what happened today and how busy have you been, man? You've been all over the place, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, today, a Monday reaction show, extra point show on WGR. So I went into the station to do that, but I actually went in a little early because Matt Bove and I needed to record our podcast. It's always game day in Buffalo, and we couldn't do that given the constraints of me flying back with the team from Denver and him flying back from Denver on Sunday. So we said, let's do 9:00. And then I had to go on the air at 10. So at 9 a.m. we started recording. We were literally doing what you and I are doing right now. And at 9:30, Matt goes, hold on. Sean McDermott was just fired. Yeah. And we just stopped everything in our tracks. And instead of continuing on, we said, okay, let's just end it here. I have to go on WGR. He's got to go on WKBW and do his thing. Let's just stop. And then we'll kind of pick up again later, but let's keep what we've talked about already, which was a recap of the game, essentially, like what happened, what went wrong, all that. So we stopped right there. I went and did my show for 2 hours. And then right after that, we did a brand new podcast. We actually went live, and like we are right now here on X and all that.
Yeah.
And we did that at noon, and that just continued the discussion and moved it forward. And since then, I've been on Cleveland radio. I've been on Sirius XM radio. I have Baltimore tomorrow. I mean, the requests keep coming in.
Of course.
A lot of them I haven't gotten to yet. And I have to say no to people, unfortunately, which I don't love doing.
Right.
But it's just too busy. And Toronto tomorrow morning. And yeah, I mean, this is the life, though. And, my boss is calling me and like, hey, how do you want to play this week? And my response is, obviously, it's all up in the air because of what's going on with the Bills and press conferences. So, right now, Eric, just to give you a peek into like my world and how it works as a beat reporter, like I'm kind of waiting on the Bills to say this is when Brandon Beane's going to speak.
Yeah.
And as soon as that happens, I'll go down to One Bills Drive that day or whatever. In the meantime, I'll be available on WGR to talk. That comes up again later today at 5 p.m. We'll show up in the Bulldog, but we don't know when we're going to hear from the Bills. We don't know when things are going to be moving forward. All we can do right now is kind of wait on all of that.
So if you haven't heard by now, we are breaking the news for you. The Bills are moving on from Sean McDermott after the loss in the divisional round to the Broncos, first reported by Rappaport, but basically every major source, kind of reported that. And the other kicker with that, soon after it was reported that Brandon Beane was going to be retained. He's going to help with the new coaching search, but also receive the new title of president of football operations. So there's a lot to unpack here, Seb, but let's start with McDermott, his tenure with the Bills, and what he brought to the Bills, especially if we're talking early on in that rebuild years ago.
I mean, I've been now with 4 different coaches through the Bills since I've been covering the team professionally. My first, when I got back to Buffalo, it was Chan Gailey, then it was Doug Marrone, then it was Rex Ryan, then Sean McDermott. And Eric, I've been many times, as you know, kind of accused of being the McDermott defender, mouthpiece. People say a lot of horrible things when it comes to that, but I won't shy away from the fact that I've always believed that Sean is a very good coach, and I have defended him as being the head coach. And I sat with that a little bit, actually over the weekend, even before this, and just wanted to examine, like, why do I think that with all these coaches and changes that Sean McDermott's always been the guy and the right guy? And here's what I've come down to, and this answers your question, I think. I think I'm well enough trained and knowledgeable enough now to know what I've seen to tell you what I think it should look like. And I've seen what it shouldn't look like. I've seen it with Rex Ryan of the world. I've seen it with Doug Marrone.
Yeah.
And I've seen what it does look like in being successful with Sean McDermott. And I think that to me, it's always been, that's what it should look like. And when you think about moving on, you're like, well, what does it look like with somebody else? And that can just be a scary thing, right? Because you don't know what it could look like with somebody else.
Yeah.
And I think that you're asking the question, like, what did they have in Sean McDermott? He was a culture builder. He brought something to this organization they have not had since the 1990s. He brought stability. He brought culture. He brought a buy-in and a belief. that was desperately needed. We could always pick apart mistakes he made, good things, bad things, all the little things that go along with coaching in a game. But on a week-to-week basis, the consistency, on a year-to-year basis, the consistency, I think that's something that I think has meant a lot to this organization. And one of the reasons why I was very surprised by the move today. It doesn't mean that the next head coach can't win a Super Bowl or be better than Sean McDermott. It doesn't mean that at all. But I know what it's supposed to look like, I think, after all this. And what I saw with McDermott was what it's supposed to look like from a macro level every time around the building.
And he's definitely the guy that preached consistency, lived consistency. Everything he preached, he lived by, right? And I think when you're talking man to man, not just football player, the coach, I think if you talk to any of the players or anyone on that staff, they're going to tell you the same thing, that he practiced what he preached and he was who he was. And what he did for players on the field was, yes, he got the best versions of themselves. Yes. But I'm sure when those players look back on their time with McDermott, it'll be a lot of the stuff that McDermott kind of emulated or preached to them off the field that they will reflect upon when we're talking about Sean McDermott, the coach. And so, again, you can criticize all the things that have happened and transpired over the last 9 years, and especially 8 of them when you include Josh Allen in the mix and having arguably the best player in the NFL as your quarterback leading your team, and what he embodies, and a lot of what Josh embodies, Sean McDermott embodies. And there's a reason why they believed in a guy like Josh Allen, and they went out and got a guy like Josh Allen. And so I do think that, it was an up and down tenure. I do believe that McDermott actually evolved as not just as a human and opening up to fans and letting them see him, the behind the scenes McDermott, and let loose a little bit, joke a little bit. You saw that that evolution and growth over the years. But you also saw it on the field. It was very rare where one season they were weak in this area and they mentioned it, and you guys would always ask him questions about it. And that next season he didn't address that, or in the offseason they didn't try to do it better and again change the process. He was always evolving. He was always trying to grow as a coach on and off the field. And I do believe this year, arguably his best season as a coach. So I do understand why it's shocking that he was let go. But at the same time, all of these wounds from prior years, after, each year it's something new. It's something new. It's terrible to say. It's whether it's injuries, whether it's refs, whether it's, mismanagement of something or not being aggressive enough in certain areas. Like, all these calluses are great when you're going against young teams, and you see that experience on the field. But at a certain time, it becomes a point of, okay, is that hindering the actual ceiling of this team? I will say, I think McDermott can get anyone to play for him. I think he's a great coach. I think he can get the best out of players, guys that are, undrafted or late round picks. He's going to maximize those guys and bring them to their full potential. But it just wasn't enough, again, especially considering that Josh was the quarterback for the Bills. So with that said, though, what do you think that was the root cause of the disconnect? Because I think many of us could read the tea leaves. Many of us talk to people and hear things. There was some type of friction, between Beane and McDermott, and maybe even it's just a structure. It could start with the structure, the philosophy and structure that Pagula put in place when they brought McDermott on, then brought on Beane. Where was the disconnect there? Because it seems like it had grown over the last year or two.
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint exactly. And let's just say that I'm sure that they didn't always on everything see eye to eye for the last 9 years. But I think that they've always felt that they were better off with each other than without each other. They're successful, right? I mean, that's what happens in business. Hey, you and I don't have the exact same vision all the time. We don't have the exact same, we don't agree all the time on a free agent, a signing, a draft pick, but we make it work because we're making the collective decision that's better for the Buffalo Bills, not for each individual person. And they've always said that. So I don't think it has to be that it was, oh my God, they had this incredible marriage all the time. But yeah, I think they were pretty much aligned and understood that what they were doing was best for the Bills and the collective decisions they made, even if they disagreed. That being said, it just seemed to me that over the last, I don't know, since last summer, this year, that there was some sort of disconnect that was happening. And I'll go back to the comments that were made even when the trade deadline happened. And Brandon Beane is meeting with us, and he says it seems he was really upset that like he thought a trade was going to happen. It didn't, right? Like there was something in the works. And then we asked him, do you believe you still have a championship roster? He said, absolutely. Yes, I believe we have a championship roster. 4 days later, they go to Miami. They get blown out. In the post-game press conference, Sean McDermott is asked, hey, Brandon Beane said, you still have a championship roster. Do you believe that? His answer was, I love the guys in this room. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He didn't answer the question. That's not someone who's backing up his GM. Does that make sense, right?
Yeah.
Then that same trade deadline, Jacoby Myers gets traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars, a name that had been in the rumor mill for the Bills. And leading into the Jacksonville game, we heard a few times, even to me on my radio show with Sean McDermott, him mention, well, Jacoby Myers, they added him. He really helped. Like he was just like would add, and he would just kind of say these little things that made it feel like, okay.
Throwaway type comments. You're like, notable.
Yeah. Right. Notable comments. Exactly. He's thrown in there. And it just felt like that was kind of the case. Now, again, I don't think you have to have one incident, right? I don't think you have one thing. Eric, I mean, you look at the Ravens, they go 19 years, Jim Harbaugh, they move on. You don't have to have something sinister drama behind the scenes that we need to have made for TV movies about, right? Sometimes relationships just run their course. Sometimes you just need a new voice. And maybe that's a little bit of the accumulation of everything you talked about earlier just happened eventually.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of breadcrumbs, like you just mentioned a few of them. And it, again, for McDermott to make those comments, he's very careful, cautious, calculated with everything he presents publicly. I think that's one thing you definitely learned as McDermott became the coach of this team. And I think when he says things, he says them for a reason. And I said it the other day on social media, it felt like this was kind of building in that direction. It was kind of heading in that direction. At the same time, I could say, yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if the Bills moved on from McDermott. And then 5 minutes later, be like, you know what? But the stability and consistency that he brings, I could see them sticking with him, especially when you consider what Pegula has dealt with on the Sabre side, which I'm not even well versed in that, but I know from afar that it has not been easy and it has not been smooth. And so
it's one of the reasons that I was surprised today. Like when this news happened, I was surprised. And honestly, one of the reasons is you have an owner who is trying to take care of the Sabres, and now they're starting to win a little bit. And he just went through a GM change. He's had a lot of change over the years. He also has a brand new stadium on the football side that he's putting together and has a lot on his plate right now. Right. So I think all of that is always considered when moves like this are made. They are business people after all, at the end of the day. But what it does tell me is, I mean, they're serious about trying to bring somebody in to get them to the next step. Because if you don't, right, this is something that Matt Bove and I talked about today. And if the next coach comes in and you don't get to the Super Bowl, you didn't accomplish the goal of what you did of what today was behind, right?
Right.
What was behind today.
Yeah, no doubt. And then at the same time, you're looking back and like, hey, maybe you regret making that move of firing McDermott. And again, but at the same time, he had how many swings at it. And so I just think when the structure they built initially, if we're talking top-down philosophy and stuff like that, the structure that they built made sense at the time. First of all, McDermott was there before Beane got there. And I imagine McDermott had something to do with hiring Beane. And
signing off on it, right?
I'm signing off on it. And I'll even go as far as to say that first draft, although Whaley got the credit, technically, it was part of that personnel staff. A lot of those guys that the Bills drafted that year in that first season were guys that Beane and his staff over in Carolina brought in on a lot of top 30 visits. So again, getting off tangent there, but I do think that something had to give with the structure because that wasn't working. You have two very alpha-like minds, one in a coach, one in a GM. And I'm sure they, came to the table at times and like you said, just didn't get along. And that's natural given that structure. And so now I wonder, one, Beane is now not only the GM, but currently assigned the president of football operations in a vertical structure is what they like to call it. Right. And so now he's going to be leading the coaching search. He's technically the GM as well. And so I'm interested to see the responsibilities that come with those two titles, because those are two fully loaded titles. And to me, To me, it seems, again, I'm speculating here. I feel like something is on the horizon, and maybe this leads to being the president of football operations.
Right. That's a
Eventually
great point.
hiring a GM and someone being promoted. And that could be internally. There's plenty of internal type candidates for that. And again, getting ahead of myself, but I do think that something's missing, and I feel like that could be on the horizon as well. So talk about, Beane's role here, because a lot of people, including yourself, I'm sure, and a lot of like local media thought that if there was going to be one person fired, it was going to be Beane and not McDermott.
It's so funny that, like, I mean, for the last how many years, I've just fielded so many calls and heard online from so many people how they just wanted Sean McDermott fired. Not everybody, of course, right?
Right.
So lots of Bills fans. It's run its course. Whether that would be really like, I hate this guy and he's terrible, or hey, I think it's just run its course and need somebody else. All parts of that spectrum. But this year was a shift. This year was, I think it's on the GM and roster construction. I'd rather see them move on from him. And I think with a fan base, there was a different reaction. There was a fan base. There was a different temperament that went along with all of this. So that part of it was super interesting.
Yeah.
So Brandon Beane, according to the statement that Terry Pegula put out a little bit earlier today, is going to remain the GM, and he's going to have another title of president of football operations. And I think the point you just brought up is 100% spot on. Maybe after the draft,
yes,
he just becomes the president.
Yep.
And he promotes Terrence Gray or Brian Gaine to general manager.
Yep.
They have 2 assistant general managers right now.
Yeah.
People have to remember that. Like, they have 2 guys serving in the same role, right? That could happen. The reason you wouldn't do that now is because right now he's still the guy in charge of everything with the draft, with the scouts and all of that.
Just like when Whaley was the GM. They fired him after the draft. And I remember, because I had Dan Hatman on the podcast, and he had worked in Carolina with that crew, and he runs the scouting academy that I went through. And I asked him, I had him on the show, and I'm like, why would you fire after the draft? And he said that if you're firing the GM prior to the draft, that 2-3 years, maybe even sometimes 4 years of work on that draft class now is in the hands of who? And they're going to be working with someone that possibly hasn't been in that position before, and now is working with other scouts. Like, if you're bringing an outside guy, hypothetically, to be your new GM, and you can't do that. So everything's in place already, and a lot of the hay is honestly in the barn.
Yeah.
And now I think you let Beane run that draft, and very much like how Whaley ran that draft, and afterwards he took credit for a lot of those picks. You let him run that draft with that front office personnel, and go through that process. And then, like I said, after that, then it could be like the day after, hey, Terrence Gray, hey, Brian Gaine, whoever they believe is the next guy up. It just, something feels missing, because again, after this last year or two with just the swing and narrative of McDermott and Beane, and a lot of things obviously had to do with the radio spot and WGR, all that stuff. It all matters. It all is all encompassing, but it just feels like that promotion didn't seem deserved. At least there's been up and downs with Beane, and you can evaluate a lot of things he's done good and a lot that he's done bad, but I don't think he deserved necessarily to have both those titles. And that's why I think there's something missing, and that could happen after the draft.
For sure. And just the point of comparing the Whaley situation to this in 2017, his entire scouting staff, it was Whaley and everybody else got fired, right?
Yes,
so you don't want all that intel walking out the door.
No.
And I don't think the Bills are necessarily going to be moving on from all these front office and scouts and things like that. If you're keeping Brandon Beane on, a lot of people that he's brought in that are going to stay with him. The point is, though, that yes, if you are going to make a change at GM, a lot of times you could change the GM like the Dolphins did, like the Falcons did. But those scouts are all still there because they've done the work on the draft, right? In this case, we know Brandon Beane is staying. He's not only the general manager, he is the president of football ops. Maybe something happens after the draft because he's still running everything that happens with that staff to get to the draft. The biggest change here, though, is with him being the president of football operations, that changes the structure of reporting in my eyes. So the way it's always been is the head coach, Sean McDermott, and the general manager, Brandon Beane, would separately report to ownership, Terry Pegula. Now that you are making Brandon Beane the president of football operations, to me, it would seem like the head coach will report to him, and then he will report to Terry Pegula, which also then brings into question, okay, let's say you have a really hot candidate who knows I'm going to be a head coach.
Yep.
Especially veteran coaches, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they come in and go, and you're telling, well, when you get hired, you have to report to Brandon Beane. Is he going to want to do that?
Right.
Not that anything's wrong with Brandon Beane, but a lot of times these structures, no, I'd rather report to the owner myself. I don't want to have a layer in between overseeing me.
John Harbaugh just did that. He just did that with Joe
right.
Shane and John Mara with the Giants. That's exactly
right.
what happened. And so I'm with you. Sal, like, this structure can be good, can be bad. It can be bad from, hey, if you have these well-respected head coaches, and there are only a few of them on the market right now. And if you have a few of these coaches that are like, no, I've earned the respect in the league. I deserve a say. I'm not reporting directly to the GM or the president of football operations. I should be, going to the owner. If they have an issue with that, that may deter them from taking the job. It's going to be, that's going to be a tough pill to swallow when you have Josh Allen as your quarterback possibly, but that's what it's that structure has positives and negatives. And I think we're going to see that. We're going to see that pretty soon, how with the coaches they bring in for, interviews and eventually hiring. I think that does play a factor. That structure plays a factor.
It does. Now, I would say only probably for certain candidates that really are very confident that they're going to get another job somewhere and all that. Because Eric, honestly, if all 32 NFL jobs came open today, the Bills are near the top of the list of desirable places because they have Josh Allen. It's as simple as that. They have Josh Allen. I mean, structure or not, any coach who wants to be a head coach in this league sees that dude as his quarterback who's just who's turning 30. They haven't 30 yet. He's turning 30 and has a 6 years left on his deal. He just signed last year. Yeah, they're going to want to go there. And I'll say it the way I said it on WGR today, which is, I don't care if that head coach candidate got into a back alley brawl with Brandon Beane and they hate each other's guts. Brandon Beane offered him that job. He goes, yeah, I'm going to work with Josh Allen. we can patch the other side up. Like, I just think that this is suddenly, it's either 1A or 1B most desirable job in the NFL next to the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, regardless of structure, no doubt. And like I said, I think John Harbaugh would have made a stink, which he did with the Giants. I think Kevin Stefanski, who went to the Falcons, I think he would have a little say. But Mike Tomlin, again, I wouldn't want to swap out McDermott for Tomlin. I think Tomlin's a good coach, but I think he's very much in the same boat as coaching wise as McDermott. But I think he may have a little issue with that. But maybe not, because of the quarterbacks he's worked with over the last few years. So again, I do think regardless of what structure you're using, and what the Bills are kind of shifting to, I do think it does and can have some kind of impact on the coaching candidate. And for me, I think that's also why I do think they go kind of opposite. Let's talk about that. We don't have to name names, but like philosophy wise, when a GM fires a coach, the next candidate's always interesting to watch because of the traits that they have versus the outgoing coach. So I'm wondering what you think the Bills are looking for in a head coach going forward. Again, Josh is turning 30. This is a pretty important stage when we're talking Josh Allen's career, and I'm sure he has a little say and input on this as well.
Okay, so I've believed, and I've said this for a while, that even though I would be surprised if the Bills fired McDermott, which they now have, that if they were to actually do it, you'd only really have two types of candidates that they would go after and that you could sell to the fan base even. And I still am on this. Number one is a guy who's won a Super Bowl. I don't think you fire a guy who's been so close and had so much success and say it's because we got to get over the hump and then bring in a guy that hasn't done that. Like, what is the point? Right? I mean, why not just keep the guy you have? Or a guy who hasn't had a shot yet that's a really bright young offensive mind. Like that, to me, it's got to be one of those two kind of candidates. Now, there's going to be room to split hairs and nuances and all of that. For example, if we say, well, if it's Brian Daboll, he doesn't fit either of those. Okay. He's still an offensive mind who worked really well with Josh Allen. He's from Buffalo. So there are different nuances with each guy. And I'm just bringing him for example of maybe it's not exactly those two fits, but I do think those are the two things that would make it like, those are the two traits, one or the other, the Bills would want here. You can't bring in a guy who has coached in this league, had some success, but not won a Super Bowl, because there's no difference between that and Sean McDermott. It feels the same.
Right.
Why would you have moved on then? Right.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
I just don't get it. By the way, Tomlin, like, I love Mike Tomlin as a leader of men. And
yeah,
I think he's a really good coach. Honestly, like he is Sean McDermott who punts more. That's what he is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what he is. Right. I mean, they're not going to do that. So to me, it's the Dabolls, it's the Clint Kubiaks, right? It's the next hot young guy, or it's a guy, and I don't know who this is, because there's not a lot of them out there who's going to have a Super Bowl ring and go, look, I have done this. I know what it takes. I've been there before.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do think the obvious is that it's going to be an offensive type guy. And to be honest, like, I know there was, some dot connecting right away that, hey, why can't it just be Joe Brady elevate? I don't think that would be a good move. And even asking for Josh's input, I think that's a very fine line you have to walk. I would want his input. I'd want what he's looking for in a coach and direction offensively that they're going to be going into. I want all of that information when I'm, as a GM or president of football operations, I'm sitting across the table from these interview candidates. I want to have that in my pocket and understand where Josh is coming from. But I also don't want Josh to be the sole reason why you go out and get an offensive minded guy, because I feel personally as a fan that I've been burned in that regard when it comes to Ken Dorsey. And so I want the Bills to take his information and what he wants and what he's looking for and take it to heart. But I also don't want that guiding the decision.
No,
or going with said coach.
You know what that reminds me of? In the draft when, Josh was on board, he loved Keon Coleman or he loved Dalton Kincaid.
Yeah.
Listen, he's not picking the players, folks. I think people they misconstrue that. It's when you make a move this seismic in an organization, the guy who has the most power, outside of the owner and the GM basically is Josh Allen. He's making $55 million a year as your franchise quarterback, as your face of your organization. And he at least, I think, has to be told. I would say it this way. I don't think Josh Allen was completely unaware that this was going to happen, or at least in the very next stage of it, they're like, hey, here's some of the people we're thinking about. What would you think about this offense? What would you think? What would you fit to be able to run with this personality? It doesn't mean that they have to even listen to everything. He's not going to have the veto power, right? But I think you have to at least have him in some sort of way be in the loop on the conversation. Here's another name. Michael says, what about Shanahan? Okay. So listen, yes, of course, Kyle Shanahan would be very much fitting what we're talking about. The issue is you'd have to trade for him.
Yeah.
The guy who would have to trade for him is also the guy who needs to retool the roster and have these first round picks that he needs
with not much money.
You'd probably have to trade a first round pick that you need to replenish the roster just to get Kyle Shanahan. I mean, I don't know how you could do that.
I mean, but if you are going to, he would be the guy too, because you see what he's done with all the injuries on both sides of the ball. Right. But I mean, if there is a guy, of course. The comment I want to talk about is from John here. It's a long one, but basically that's where I'm at. Beane stabbed McDermott in the back to save his own job. See, I feel that's strong. Okay, let's think about it this way, guys. Logically, all right. You have a head coach. You have a GM that reports to an owner. All right, separately, independently. The GM is going to be in and around the owner much more frequently. They're going to have a lot more interaction, a lot more communication, because he's communicating not just roster stuff, but long-term philosophy stuff, contract stuff. He has a lot to report to the owner, more so than what McDermott's dealing with on a daily basis, more micro type stuff and team type stuff. And so I think even Tim Graham reported just a few minutes ago in his Athletic article that, I mean, Pete Gwelly, right, is also a guy that was kind of augmented his role into the Bills organization, but also Brandon Beane, they would sit and actually watch the games at times with Terry. So they're together a lot more. The lines of communication happen a lot more often. And so big picture stuff are constantly being discussed between Beane and Pagula. And so I know it looks bad optically. It looks like there was some kind of like coup or takeover or snaky stuff going on behind the scenes. But really, I think this is just natural based on the structure that they had in place. And that's why I said, there's some positives and negatives to both. And so I think that, John, I think that's a little strong. I think naturally, given the structure, you're going to have your GM talking to the owner a lot more than just a head coach.
Yeah, for sure. And you don't know. I mean, listen, years ago when the Bills had some firings gone on, I had kind of peeked in and asked, like, how does this work? Like the
Mhm.
GM, and I was told, like, look, it's always the owner. The owner makes the call,
Right.
right? It's not so yeah, sure. Maybe could we hypothesize and say, Brandon Beane wanted this to happen? It could have just been Terry Pegula deciding he wanted it to
Mhm.
happen, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't know for sure how everything went down. That's why it's gonna be really interesting to not only hear the words but the tone of Brandon Beane when he
Mhm.
ultimately meets with the media at some point this week. So we don't know when that's going to be yet, but Brandon Beane eventually will meet with the media and we'll get a little bit more clarity on kind of what he believes and his vision and what happens next going forward.
Yeah, and John says, "I feel you, but how about the salary cap part of the comment? Could address the salary cap stuff because I'm trying to learn some of the dead cap stuff. Yeah, that's a whole nother ball game that we can talk about. It's a whole nother show, honestly. But and this is where when I'm talking about the structure and giving the president tag to Bean, that will allow him. He's gonna. Well, I shouldn't say allow him. That's going to add to his plate, and that's why I think there's something missing there because now those are the things that he could be dealing with on a daily basis more so than just the evaluation part of things. And that's why I think there will be some type of addition going forward. So, Michael, we appreciate the super chat there. Could they be thinking they know they're losing Joe Brady and know that any top OC is going to want to be a head coach? Because I don't see any other reason to get rid of McDermott. He's a good coach. Those are all fair questions, Sal. So I'll let you address that one. Do you think that maybe the timing of Joe Brady, because the league is telling us, it's not just us, the league is telling us that he's on the verge of possibly being a head coach. Could that timing obviously have something to do with the move this quickly?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, but that goes with anybody who's going to be a head coach soon. To me, the timing always had to be kind of now. Like, hey, like you have only a certain amount of time to do this and get this right, and and to get the guy that you want. But that's everybody. I was down there for locker cleanout on Sunday, and we were as a group thinking, okay, is it possible like they could make a move here? And I'm like, well, if they do, they got to do it soon. All these teams are hiring their coaches.
Yeah.
Kevin Stefanski just got hired by the Falcons. I'm not saying the Bills would have been interested in him, but that's one off the board. And guess what? Now he's going to start hiring OCs. Brian Dable's interviewing for the Philadelphia Eagles offensive coordinator's job. That's another one off the board if he takes that. Once these people sign contracts, there you go, right? I mean, like, so I don't know. Yes, it's a fair question about Joe Brady. The thing I keep coming back to is, are you really going to promote from within after making this move and feeling like they're doing it to go in a different direction?
Yeah, Aaron adds, the wording of the Pegula statement made it sound like there was a power structure not conducive. Almost seems like Sean called more of the shots than anything. I'll say I agree about the statement. And I think that was, again, I think that's pretty obvious reading all the tea leaves and the stuff we've heard over the course of the last year. The part about Sean calling more shots than anything, I don't find that to be true. I do believe there was some collaborative efforts between both. They both had a say in the roster. I mean, I know publicly McDermott probably had said numerous times that it's 100% on Brandon. I don't buy that. I think that is publicly stating that because on paper that is what was agreed to, but I do think it was very collaborative.
Yeah, I think that for the most part they've been collaborative. And again, I think they've always kind of realized they were better off with each other than without each other. And they had to make it work, even if it had disagreements, right, on how it went down on a free agent signing. But you make the best decision that you can for the team.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the GM would have the ultimate final say if it came down to that, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that Sean McDermott and him weren't trying to do things together as best as possible.
Agreed. Some great questions in here. We appreciate everyone joining us live here. I know it's been a long day, and I'm sure you guys are just consuming all of the content that you can while at work, I'm sure at times. But we appreciate you joining us here. So as far as the, Pegula structure and, going forward with that structure, I mean, the thing that stinks about the timing of this coaching cycle is, one, the names that are out there, it's very limited. Two, now the Bills essentially have to wait. So can you kind of talk about the timing and some of the candidates that we would like to see an interview and the rules behind, when they can interview and cannot?
Yeah, well, the Rooney rule comes into place as well, right? Yes. So there's certain candidates you have to interview, minority candidates interview, and things like that. Guys who are still coaching right now, I don't believe can do interviews in person, at least maybe virtual. I think this week it might even have to wait till the next week after the championship game. I think that's the case. Here's the thing, Eric. It's been so long since the Bills have done this. I have to brush up on this. I'm not kidding.
know, right?
It's been a while since I had this. We've always had it the other way where like Brian Dable is getting an interview or Joe Brady's getting an interview. When can they do it? So there's going to be a lot of these rules in place for when they can and when they can't do these things. If there's somebody still coaching that they want, they can wait for that person. What you don't want to happen is what happened kind of to Brian Dable back in the year that, before he got the Giants, which was, I think the Chargers were very interested, but because the Bills won and were advancing on, they got impatient and they went and hired a coach. And then Brian Dable was left there sitting going, okay, well then he went back to Buffalo. And then the next year he gets the Giants job. And, we could talk all day about the calendar and how much it hurts these candidates and things like that. That's real. But I think if the Bills identify somebody, they have to be really, they want to make sure they get them and not pivot just because the restrictions on interviewing or hiring that person.
Yeah, it's been a crazy last few days. We haven't even done the recap for the Broncos game. We'll get that to you later in the week, but we wanted to, kind of talk through some of this stuff because there's a lot to unpack and a lot to, kind of get through. So where do we go from here, Sal? Where do we go with the staff? Where do we go with the content this week?
Well,
like, what is going on, man? I imagine it has to do with when is Beane going to
talk for sure. We don't know when Beane's going to talk. And real quick, we should mention Sean McDermott wants to still coach. He's going to get hired by another team. I mean, that could be Cleveland, that could be Tennessee, that could be a lot of teams, that Raiders, right? But I think Sean McDermott would welcome an opportunity to turn another program and team around the way he did in Buffalo and, institute his own structure and his own culture because it worked out in Buffalo for him by doing that. And I think that he'll be successful wherever he goes, and what that ultimate success looks like, we don't know. As far as the Bills staff, wherever McDermott goes, he may take a lot of his staff with him. There's going to be a big changeover in staff here, most likely, right? Which is, we already know Aaron Kromer's going to retire. That's been out there. That's a huge loss for the Bills. What happens to Bobby Babich? What happens to Joe Brady, independent of either one of them being a candidate? There's a lot of things that are on the table here and on the plate and have to be decided in relative short order, actually, now that we're already week of the conference championship games. As far as us and the media, we're going to be waiting on any word from the Bills, when Brandon Beane's going to speak, when anybody else is going to speak in the organization. And as soon as we have that, obviously, we'll have more content and, put some more stuff out there.
No, we appreciate all of you guys joining us here on Monday. It's about 4:00. Lots of news, lots of things to unpack. And as you all know, Sal and I will have a bunch of content for you over the course of this week and next few weeks. We're going to be working on not only the Broncos recap, but also some content and topics going forward this offseason here on Turf to Tape. So we appreciate everyone joining us live and, the re-listen, the rewatch later on today. And we'll let you guys know and keep your head on a swivel when it comes to content later this week. And as the offseason now begins for the Buffalo Bills, and it's starting in a very frenzy fashion. But I guess we shouldn't be surprised, Sal, right? I mean, these are the type of things, the curveballs. And the curveballs happen when you cover this team, regardless of it's good, it's bad. And unfortunately, it's bad right now with the season being over and then the changes immediately underway for the Buffalo Bills. So on behalf of Turf to Tape, I'm Eric Turner. That's Sal Capaccio. We'll see you next week.